Hello YouTube. This is my first ever YouTube video, but I thought it might be something you might be interested in. I'm a big fan of the Primary Arms FFP, first focal plane scopes. This happens to be a 4 to 14 by 44 mil dot scope. They also have that patented or patent pending ACSS reticle. This is not about the scope itself. There are lots of reviews out there. I'm very pleased with the scope. I own 4 of them now. And what I wanted to show you today, though, was my one complaint, not complaint, but when you look at the high-end scopes, that this is basically allowing me to replace the $1,000+ first focal plane scopes. The one thing missing that is not available typically in a lower-end scope is a zero stop. And if you're doing a lot of long-distance shooting like I am, having a zero stop is a must. When you're out there and you're dialed up, 3-4 revolutions on the turret, but you're not exactly sure where you're at, and then you really quickly want to get back down to your, let's say, 100-yard or 200-yard zero, you may overshoot or undershoot and be way off the target. So the zero stop feature in the high-end scopes is obviously something very, very useful, very, very practical. I have come up with a very simple solution to creating a zero stop on the Primary Arms scope, and that's what I'm going to show you today. First of all, just to confirm, again, this is a Primary Arms. It's a, sorry, that's at a cockeyed angle, but this is a Primary Arms 4 to 14 by 44 first focal plane scope. I happen to have a bubble level on there just for, again, more accuracy at long range. I've got the flip out bubble level. Some of my other scopes, my Primary Arms scopes, have a vortex bubble level. They all work equivalently well. I've also got the 31mm objective lens cap and the 19mm eyepiece lens cap from Butler Creek. Anyway, I'm going to stop the video and then I'm going to quickly show you how to make a great zero stop for your Primary Arms first focal plane scope. This may work on other Primary Arms scopes with the same types of turrets. I don't know, I don't own those, but if you have the same exact turrets on those scopes, those different models of scope, it may work on those as well. Okay, now to complete this process of basically installing your own custom zero stop on the Primary Arms first focal plane scope, first thing you want to do is you want to get it on your rifle, you want to get out and you want to zero it. I zero this one at 100 yards. Some folks will zero it at 200 yards. Obviously, do whatever your preference is. But then ultimately, you're going to need a couple of tools. You're going to need the turret Allen wrench that comes with the scope to remove the turret. You're going to need a small screwdriver. I've got a small flathead screwdriver. You could even use a paper clip, whatever. I'll show you what that's for in a second. But most importantly, and this is what was the most important thing, I found these online after doing some very precise measurements. What I'm showing you here online with non-ferrous fastener ink, I was able to find this particular model. It's a nylon washer, which I'm calling a nylon spacer or a nylon shim. It's N as in Nancy, F as in Frank, 9320. This is what they look like. They're basically nylon washers. But the important thing is the inner diameter and the outer diameter are perfectly matched to what's inside this turret, which I'll show you in a second. So you may be able to find something similar at your local hardware store. I was not. And so I basically found these online. I took a chance, I ordered them, and as you'll see, they fit perfectly. So make a note of that. This is the exact package that they came in. They came in a package of 100. I'll probably never use all 100, but I've probably used about 10 or 15 already on my multiple Primary Arms scopes. But I think you'll appreciate this is a very low-cost solution to turning a low-end first focal plane scope into a high-end performance by adding the zero stop. Okay, so to complete this process is very simple. First of all, I have to carefully remove the elevation turret by removing the Allen screw with the supplied Allen wrench. Now, carefully lift this straight up and off. It's just basically held in there by an O-ring. Straight up and off. Be careful not to cause any clicks to your turret because you'll obviously lose your zero alignment. I didn't bother showing you the process, but certainly when you zero your rifle, it will not be on zero relative to the turret markings. So obviously if you're at that point where you've just zeroed your rifle, not only are we removing the turret, but you're going to eventually, when you replace the turret, line the zero mark up with the zero lines. That'll basically get you a 0 point for your 100-yard zero, your 200-yard zero, whatever. Okay, now we've got the open turret, and what you're going to see right here is an O-ring. I'm hoping that you can see that. I'll try to zoom in. I'm not sure how well that's going to show as far as the zoom, but I will try to zoom that in. You're going to see a black O-ring there, and I measured the dimensions precisely for these shims to the metal underneath that O-ring. Now, you don't want to damage the O-ring. I think for longevity purposes, you want that O-ring to remain intact. You don't want any cuts or anything. So don't try to pry it out with a screwdriver. It's a fairly soft O-ring. Let me show you what you do, and the only reason for the screwdriver is this. I'm going to squeeze and push forward on that O-ring, and notice that I'm able to, by doing that, I'm able to actually get it to pull away very gently from where it's seated. I'm just going to take the edge of the screwdriver very carefully, and I'm just going to basically pull with my fingers at this point. I just used the screwdriver to guide it up, but now I've basically removed the O-ring, okay? But I've not done any damage to it. I've not marred it or cut it or pinched it, so it's been removed carefully. Now, we take the washers, the shims, and look how perfectly these lay. Again, I found the perfect solution. They drop right over the center post, but they're supported on the edges by the outer edge of the turret housing. That's exactly what you want. What we want to do is we want to prevent the turret from dialing down any further than our zero stop. Now, this is not going to give you a perfect zero stop, but what it's going to do is going to prevent you from moving the turret more than 2 or 3 mils past the zero spot. So once it tightens up, you know you've gone past your normal zero. So what I found in my scopes, and it depends on your scope and your relationship to your rifle and whether you're using a 20 MOA base, whatever, basically I found 2 to 3 shims will basically line up the edge where that O-ring goes in with the edge of the last shim or the top shim. What you basically want to do is you don't want the O-rings, you don't want to continue to stack O-rings or let's say nylon washers. You don't want to keep stacking nylon washers up past where the O-ring seats. You do want the turret to go down over this O-ring. So what I've generally found is somewhere between 2 and 3, depending on what that particular scope is dialed to, somewhere between 2 and 3 of these washers, of these non-ferrous fastener incorporated washers, will just reach the edge of where the O-ring seat or the O-ring slot is in the turret bar. So then you drop those on. Let's assume it's 2 in this place. I want you to be able to see this. So let's assume it takes 2. Now I carefully take the O-ring, and with my fingers I gently just roll it back over into its original spot. As we stated before, if you've zeroed your rifle, now is the time to make sure that this zero mark lines up with the hash marks that show you when you're back at zero. So what I'm going to do is very carefully and gently, I'm going to lower this turret on top of the, I'm going to lower the turret dial on top of the turret post, and you may have to tweak it just back and forth a little bit to get it to seat. Be careful you're going straight on. And now it's seated. Okay, now that is seated in there, and you can see that in that case, we have our zero aligned with our zero mark. Okay, now all we're going to do is I'm going to back out a little bit here now. We're going to put our Allen wrench bolt back on top of this turret. We're going to tighten it down. And obviously you want to do this like you always would. And now what's going to happen is, when I'm going to dial up first, but when let's say I'm dialed up 2 or 3 elevation turns because I'm shooting at a long range target, maybe 700 yards. And now I want to quickly change to a target that's at 100 yards or close to 100 yards where my 0 point is. All I have to do is dial this back, and what you're going to feel is right here already, right there's my regular 0, but I wouldn't have known that except for the fact that just after that, it starts tightening up. I don't want to force this. I do not want to go put a lot of pressure. As soon as you feel that tension, you know you're back to your regular 0. So effectively, with a few cents worth of parts, now granted we had to buy 100 of them, but I think even then they were probably just a couple dollars, but with just a few parts, we now have a 0 stop, a very effective 0 stop on a very low end but high quality first focal plane scope. I hope that's helpful.